Let's take a short break with a homegrown uplifting track. This is Be Who You Wanna Be from Newcastle band Never Say Never Music.
Be who you wanna be.
This is for the struggle. This is for the hustle.
Be who you wanna be.
This is for the struggle. Come on, use that muscle.
Check out Be Who You Wanna Be and more from Never Say Never Music on your favourite streaming platform or visit neversaynevermusic.com.
Bring it back.
This is Towards Understanding. I'm Clayton and we love on this show working towards a better understanding of our world. And right now we're asking the big question, is technology reducing our humanity? That's the subject of this book called Here Be Monsters. The author of the book, Richard King, is my guest on the program.
This is one quote out of your book. It says, "The body is not an extension of the self. It is the self, and the self is it." Putting that together with sort of your comments around biological life is human living. So often with tech components, we often say, well, this will help this part of this person, whether it's be implants or whatever else it might be. But we're not looking at, again, that sort of social element of what technology would do. Even before we came in for this interview, I was just having a chat to somebody about it. They said, oh yeah, but what about people who have great disabilities? Wouldn't that be fantastic? I said, yeah, absolutely. But have we thought the society part of that? Could you talk into how we balance that out? Because I think that's all of our hearts, isn't it? To say we want to help people, but where is that line between technology helping and technology hurting society in the body?
That's right, and medicine is really where the rubber hits the road, isn't it? Because we've had various kinds of prostheses, for a long time, and whether we're talking about false legs or arms or dentures or this kind of stuff, that they do help us, and these are of course technologies, as you rightly say. It's interesting that the big tech companies will often kind of, and I don't mean to downplay the importance of these technologies at all, but it is interesting how they will tend to lead with a health application and then kind of bring in the other applications afterwards. I mean, even Elon Musk with his brain-computer interface machine does this. We're helping people. But although he is, to be fair, fairly open that he wants to, connect up everyone to these machines and make us all, sort of symbiotic with the internet, which to me just sounds terrifying. Although the internet is terrifying anyway to me. Look, with the whole sort of emergence of the sort of technological worldview, which I would argue really sort of kicks in with the Enlightenment, at which point people begin to sort of conceive of the universe almost as a gigantic apparatus, whose various bits and pieces are sort of set in motion by other various bits and pieces. As part of that, what you get is a notion of, and this of course is partly, more than partly related to the decline of religion. What you get is a notion of the human being as him or herself also a kind of machine. But what's happened recently is that you've got a kind of dualism that's kind of snuck back in, whereby you say, okay, well, there's your sort of brain bit, there's the mind, and then the rest of it's just like kind of, an appendage. I think that's not only a wrong-headed but quite dangerous way of thinking about human beings. And this kind of thinking is quite dominant in Silicon Valley. They all read that book Homo Deus by is it Yuval Noah Harari, the Israeli historian and futurist. And he says in that book, there is no fundamental difference. There is no in principle or in kind difference between a human being punching commands into a coffee machine and the coffee machine itself. It's simply a difference of complexity. Well, that's just nonsense. Okay, that's just nonsense. But that's the kind of dualism that you get. And if you think of human beings in that way, of course, if you think of them as just kind of, wet sacks who happen to have information flowing through them, then you can sort of take that information out, or you can put something in, and you can do all kinds of whiz-bang things. And this is why, in Silicon Valley, they think they're going to upload brains to computers or do whatever else it is that they're on this week. I just don't think any of that's going to happen, but the belief that it can happen is going to sanction interventions which may, in the long term, and for more subtle, nuanced reasons, undermine our human flourishing. So the idea that one can sort of intervene and separate the thinking bit from the kind of physical bit is a very, very dangerous one, I think.
Yeah. You did mention in there too around the idea of as faith and religion has not had as much of an impact, and certainly in your book there's aspects where you comment, as there are in history, of faith and religion not having great impacts in the world, but certainly there's a whole group of people who are listening right now who have a Christian faith belief. What would be your encouragement to them about having conversations in this space from that lens of faith?
To answer honestly, I think they have an advantage over me in the sense that they already have a notion of the sacred as it's related to human beings. I'm not fortunate enough to have that notion, but I do use the word sacred quite a lot in the book. And a new friend was picking me up on this the other day in a sort of quizzical fashion, sort of, what do you mean by sacred? Those sort of things. I said, I don't really know, but, that it's the idea, I suppose, it's the Kantian idea for me that we are, if you like, ends in ourselves. We are not means to an end. Part of the reason I balk at this technological way of thinking, this technological view of the world, is because it becomes increasingly apparent that these people think of human beings as, again, no different themselves from smart machines, who can be, if you like, kind of utilized and pressed into service in a way that makes the whole world into sort of a system, if you like, sort of a mechanical system. So for me, I would encourage them to. It's impertinent of me to encourage them to do anything, but I think insisting upon the specialness of human beings is absolutely key. But for me, where that specialness comes from is the social, I suppose, which is why I would describe myself as a socialist, and I'm sure that's something that's marveled into the various belief systems that are in the heads of people listening. There's overlap there, but one needs to say, whether you say, it's, well, we're made in God's image and that's what brings us all together, or you say, well, there are certain things about consciousness that we just don't understand, and we shouldn't be, thinking of ourselves in these machine-like terms. At the end of the day, it does matter, of course, because there are, as you say, I say in the book, there are problems with, that I think there are problems with sometimes with the religious worldview, but on that we can agree. That's not a problem that people listening to this are necessarily going to have. They're not going to think about human beings in those instrumental terms, and that's a good thing. So carry on.
Absolutely.
We're going to be back in a couple of minutes' time with Richard King, author of the book Here Be Monsters: Is Technology Reducing Our Humanity? Here on Towards Understanding.
Share your brand, your event, your message.
Across 90 Christian radio stations and major cities in Australia and New Zealand.
By sponsoring Towards Understanding, hosted by Clayton Bjelland.
More than 210,000 people tune into Towards Understanding each week. And with just one sponsorship, you'll reach this immense engaged audience. Find out more about this exciting and unique opportunity now
on the sponsorship page at positivemedia.com.au.
Let's talk also about that third part. We've touched on bits of it, but this idea of tech and creativity and freedom and even work, technology taking away the value of work, those sorts of things. A couple of quotes that I picked up from your book. Dependence on robots is linked to decreasing expectations of people and a decline of empathy. That mixed with this idea of, that you talk about a lot, that we need to use different language as we talk about technology. Could you talk about those ideas together, that technology, especially technology nowadays, sort of taking jobs, and I suppose it's done that in all ways, but taking work from people, but also having to talk about technology and humanity in different ways and not keep putting them together?
Yes, absolutely. It is interesting, actually, how technological our language has become. I mean, we've all seen those self-help books, that invite us to rewire our brains and all this sort of thing, So getting away from that is very, very important. And there is a sense, in which you become kind of, through that language and through other things as well, enmeshed in a world of machines. It's interesting. I was at a talk the other day at the Wheeler Centre, and someone was saying that that we were talking about AI in general, and someone was saying, as someone often does say, look, a lot of the jobs that are going now, one wouldn't want to save, and of course that's true, but automation is not just about it doesn't just happen at the point where the machine takes your job. It's a long process. In the 19th century, Frederick Winslow Taylor, I think his name was, went into all of these factories and he said, well, this isn't very efficient. We'll compartmentalize the work, we'll fragment it, we'll have you doing one task and you doing another task and you doing a third task. And so the worker who once upon a time had a sense of how the whole system worked and had a certain amount of power by dint of having that sense, is now made effectively into a fleshbot. And then, of course, it becomes possible to come in with, not smart machines in this case, but simply, old-style factory machines and say, well, you're doing that and a machine can do that, you see? So it's a long process. I panicked slightly when you were asking the question. I thought, how am I going to talk to that? But it's actually a really good question because, and maybe I should have brought it out in the book a little bit more, the sense in which there is this sort of dialectical link between the sort of automation itself and the sense that human beings can sort of should play no more than the role of a part in a machine. It's constantly coming back. Backwards and forwards between those two poles. So I would say that more important than the words we use is just understanding the processes by which those machines are creating what the lovely artist and author James Bridle called a black box society, a society that is increasingly opaque to its human inhabitants and as such quite alienating oftentimes. We know that things work, we don't know why they work, Yeah.
And I think this is, as your book talks about, this idea of tech and human connection. We've touched on that. Tech and the body, tech and creativity and freedom and work is all part of it. Another quote from your book, as tech expands, we tend to question less. That is, it tends to take a foothold. It has something that we haven't thought through. I love the quote from William James, the philosopher. He said, at the end of our days, our life experience will equal what we pay attention to, whether by choice or default. If we don't pay attention, we're at risk. And I thought that was a nice summary of,
very nice.
I think, the challenge that you're laying down before us as well. So as we do wrap up, and we've tried to just touch off on so much in such a short time throughout what you've written in the book. But if the challenge is to say, how do we think differently about tech? How do we think differently about what it's going to mean, not just for the here and the now, or just through the economics, or just through the individual lens, but through the societal lens, through the long-term lens? How do we best help our audience and us do that? Are there tips and tricks that you've got for us to do that? Is it we just need to take time to sit back? Is it we need to get in a group and ask questions? Do you have any best ways we can do that?
One of the technologies through which we connect is these new smart technologies. Now, it seems to me that a lot of people in our world, which is to say people who deal with ideas and media, now use are obliged, compelled, really, to use social media. And this sometimes is where things start to fall apart, because it's not always the healthiest place for ideas to flourish, to say the least. Part of that has to do with the way in which post-printing we kind of a public sphere emerged in which people could talk to one another, who weren't physically present to them, and with that came certain conventions and certain codes, etc., etc. But what happens with social media is that the personal, the interactive, it collapses back into the public sphere. So being aware of that is, I think, the first thing. Not engaging with any of the, social media, it's difficult for me to describe sometimes to my students just how different life was before social media, and it's quite striking how habituated they are to it. About 10, 12 years ago, I just did nothing scientific, just hands up. If I could give you, if I could make you an offer tomorrow, your lives will be as they are, but you won't have social media. I think most people put their hands up. I did the same experiment 2 years ago or so. And they looked at me like I was mad. It was like well, then how should we talk to each other? I suppose, again, I feel slightly impertinent kind of giving tips and tricks on anything, because I'm as sunk in this mire as anyone. But I think just being aware that what the technologies are doing, potentially anyway, is shaping the way we interact with one another. Okay, is a really good start, and if we can do that, and we can stay out of the kind of trivial stuff, and stay out of the nasty stuff and all that sort of thing, then that's a good start. After that, well, I really think we need to put the question of technology, as Heidegger called it, the question concerning technology, back in the centre of politics, back in the centre of our deliberations, because it's depressing to me. I work in a university, but the university is no longer an institution of humanistic oversight. It just isn't. It's absolutely mapped into this system of techno-scientific capitalism, as I've called it. So we're just going to have to do it ourselves, and we're going to have to think more creatively about how we do things, what we do in schools, whether not only whether we spend as much time as we're spending with computers, but whether we spend as much time as we are with books, whether we want to get kids outside, growing vegetables, or learning to work on their own houses and all that kind of thing. I think a layered response is needed.
Yeah, look, I think what I loved as we've had our conversation today and through the book as well is that as we've mentioned too, there's a whole group of people who have a very strong faith about what it is. You're coming from a slightly different perspective to that, and yet I think we're landing in very similar places in terms of the value of somebody, the value of humanity, the value of what that is. And I think that's another part that I take from what you have written is let's think more critically, let's look bigger, and let's also truly value what it means to be a human and all the preciousness of that, and don't let technology take that away. And I think that's the beauty of this challenge that you've certainly given me through this book to think in those ways as well, Richard. And I'm trusting that will be the case today, and also for others who might read your work as well. I'm assuming that's what you're hoping for. Yeah,
Amen to
exactly. Richard, it's wonderful to have you with us today. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. Enjoyed it, Clayton. Thanks. Cheers.
Richard King, writer, author, critic, and the author of the book Here Be Monsters, my guest here on Towards Understanding.
Let's take a short break with a homegrown uplifting track. This is Be Who You Wanna Be from Newcastle band Never Say Never Music.
Be who you wanna be.
This is for the struggle. This is for the hustle.
Be who you wanna be.
This is for the struggle. Come on, use that muscle.
Check out Be Who You Wanna Be and more from Never Say Never Music on your favourite streaming platform, or visit neversaynevermusic.com.
Bring it back.